I have questions that come from all of the articles that I've read about you.
Okay.
And then the Library of Congress has, usually they give us an outline of like questions that we can go by if we choose to, and so we can use some of theirs. But then I read your story and I added what your story is to the questions. So these will all pertain to you and your
Okay.
So
well, and I'm going to send you that DVD on which I have, I didn't have an envelope, a bubble envelope, and they break if I send them in a regular envelope. So I'm going to send you that, and you will enjoy that. I just tell my whole story.
Oh, awesome.
From beginning to end. It's an hour long. Okay. And I've given away hundreds, probably thousands of them. I have a man who makes them for me.
Wow. And I saw your sister had posted that in the area where she lived about your story.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I want to be sure about is that you don't call me a code talker. That's not my title. Okay. I think you called me a cryptographer, and that's what I was. But only the Indian men were code talkers. That was their title. And when they became encoders and decoders of their language to us, then they were given that title, code talker or wind talker, because we wrote nothing down by radio. Everything I did was by radio. Mm. And, codes are broken by being written.
Right. So you had mentioned about code talker, and in my questions, I did not put that because I listened to you with that. Now, I also saw code officer. So was that another?
A cryptographer was also called a coding officer. Okay. A coding officer, because if you're a cryptographer, you can encode and decode both.
Okay.
You work at both of those.
Mm-hmm. So when I ask these questions that have to do with those words in the questions, would you rather me use code officer or cryptographer?
Either one, or just coding officer if you want to.
Okay, that's what I wrote down with the questions.
Because I was commissioned, as an ensign in the beginning. And so that became an officer right away because I taught Spanish in high school. They said, if you can learn Spanish, you can learn the codes.
Oh, nice.
That's why they put me in that. And then they just told everybody I was in communications until 1976.
That's what the article said. That was about 30 years. Wow.
I was on inactive duty. My card says released to inactive duty. And then in 76, they told me you can talk about it now. I couldn't even tell my husband. I couldn't tell my parents, we didn't talk about it among ourselves because that old saying, the slip of the lip can sink a ship. They told us that every day.
Yep.
Well, there's that old joke too. If you want news to spread, you use telephone, telegram, or tell a woman,
I've never heard of that. That's cute.
They used to tell us all those jokes.
My lady friends would like that. I don't think we've heard that. If you want news to spread, what is it?
Telephone, telegram, or tell a woman. I proved that was false.
Yes, you did. I'm putting that down too.
Yeah.
That is awesome. I guess we could go ahead and get started.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take so much time.
No, I enjoy talking to you. I enjoy taking a few minutes.
Let me tell you another just very short thing.
Yes.
I taught school for 55 years after I got out of the military. And my husband used to tell me, he can tell a teacher a mile away. He said they will talk at the drop of a hat, but you don't need the hat. So
I like that too. I like that. And it's so true as a teacher, because I think I told you I homeschooled my kids for 20 years. And just now I got my transcripts from college, just now after 35 years.
yeah,
And our church helps with some of the schools, and we were feeding lunch to the teachers, and I talked with the vice principal, because where people are at needing subs right now, I don't have the full college degree, but after 35 years between church, Sunday school, and my kids, I've got experience. I got some.
you have the real McCoy when it comes to teaching.
Yes.
Well, see, I've retired twice from two states.
Mhm. The more I interview you all, World War II vets, the more I realize, just like you, just continuously going, people put in their minds by the time 50, 60, 70, more like 60, 70, 80,
Right.
that they're done, and they
Yeah, true.
no.
Oh, I retired the second time when I was 86.
Wow.
I went back to the community college in Panama City, and I was only going to teach 5 years. And I stayed there 20 more. So I had 55 altogether.
That's awesome. So we will start with the very basics, and that is, what is your name? What is your full name?
My full name is Winifred Breegle.
Okay. And where and when were you born?
February 5th, 1922.
Wow. Yes, see, next year.
A long time ago. I'm working on my 100.
Do you
this year, I've had my 99th birthday.
Do you have a goal for, the last person that I interviewed, they said they wanted to make it to like 106. Do you have a goal?
Well, just to keep my mind as active as it is, and as be as cognitive as I can be.
Yes, I like that.
Now, I feel like I could do without anything else in my body but my mind.
Yes, I agree too.
What?
Tell her where you were born.
Oh, I was born in Woodsfield, Ohio, at home.
Wow.
Then we didn't go to the hospital even if we were pretty sick, but we only went if we thought we were going to die.
Right. Where were you when you found out about Pearl Harbor, and how did you feel about that?
When Pearl Harbor happened, I was teaching, and I went to my classroom, and they came running and said, "Come down in the activity room and look at the TV." And I just couldn't believe that we were, and they were using our own ships to sink us.
Yes. Yes.
They had little one-man subs under our ships for days, and their ambassador was in Washington saying, "We're not going to attack you. We're not going to." We didn't want to go to war because we weren't really ready for war at that time.
Wow.
And we were working on the Atlantic side anyway. So it was a total surprise.
When we see the pictures of it, we just see the flyby and I did not realize that there were ships underneath them.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
one man submarines just waiting under there for the order to attack.
Wow.
So they attacked us from above and below.
I have to go back and look at that more. Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Let's see. What do you recall about the surge of patriotism in the U.S. that after Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Well, President Roosevelt said, "This is a matter of survival." He got on TV and radio and did his fireside chats, he called them. And he encouraged us to just be for our country and help each other. And that's what happened. You know, I was in Washington, D.C. 5 years during the war in uniform. I never saw one protester, not one. Nobody protested. Everybody was trying to survive.
Right. And the last lady I interviewed, she was a Rosie. She actually just got the Rosies, the Congressional Medal of Honor, and spent 40 years trying to do that. And she commented as well about what you just said. And part of the things that I'm doing is to try to help people remember what it is to be an American. And,
Right.
you know, my hope is with this program I'm talking to you about is unity, and just to get people to think.
And let me tell you about the people. We went in early, and they in Washington, they hadn't seen very many women in the military. And they just adopted, every place I've gone, they've adopted me, even here in Tennessee. But we paid nothing to ride the buses. The bus driver would put his hand over the thing that you put some money in, you know, to ride downtown, just for fun. We would go, and they did. And that one Christmas, he and his wife brought us. Well, we did. They didn't have any place to put us, so they sent us to Smith College in Massachusetts for midshipman's training, and paid for apartments for us to live. Another girl and I, who was with me the whole time, always were together, and we were assigned things together. And this bus driver and his wife brought to us the first Christmas we were there, a fully cooked Christmas dinner, a little artificial Christmas tree, so we would have something in our apartment for Christmas. Now, you know, and I don't even remember his name. We just called him Pop.
Oh, that's so
So
awesome.
I don't
that
even
they did
know.
that.
I know.
That's awesome.
They just, you know, they were, and we rode every place on military vehicles. I went to Philadelphia and saw the Army Navy game. I was a farm girl from Ohio. I hadn't been out of the state. And I was only 21, so I got a real education.
Right, really quickly too.
Oh, yes. Very stressful, but very interesting.
That's so awesome. What was your full rank, and what part of the armed service were you in?
I was in the Navy. My full rank, and I was ready to be promoted when the war ended. I was an ensign, and since at first we were reserves because we were only supposed to be in during the war, and Congress, 4 years after I went in there, passed a law saying that we would be full-fledged Navy personnel. So we weren't reservists anymore. So I was an ensign and loved it.
Awesome. I love it. You actually had a rank. That's
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Now, did you enlist?
I did. I had to go 40 miles to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and had to ride the train. They didn't have buses to Pittsburgh, to the station, to the recruiting office. And he was glad to see me because I had a college degree. I was teaching a foreign language, and they were looking for people to go into the coding, you know. And he said, he filled out my papers. He says, take these back to your principal. I had taught 1 year, and tell him, you know, to release you from your contract. He wouldn't do it.
Really?
He said, I don't have any way to replace you. He said, not that you're indispensable, you know, like that. But he said, the men have gone and the women are going. And he said, I can't find anybody to replace you. Well, I was heart sick. I didn't know what to do. So I went back to the recruiter and I said, he won't do it. He just reached across the table, got my papers, signed his name to release me from my contract. He says, now you go back and show him this and tell him that you're in the Navy now and report in 2 weeks. Then when I went back, Congress had passed a law saying that we had to get our jobs back or an equivalent. And yes, and he wouldn't talk to me. 2 years later, he retired, but I had to put up with that man for 2 years as my principal. I just stayed away from him and he stayed away from me. He hated me, I think.
Oh, man.
He thought I just let him down.
Oh, and it wasn't even you at all. It was the
no.
gentleman at the office that said, you know what, we need you. And that's a shame.
Well, my husband had enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Then they weren't separate. They were together. And he had been sent to the Pacific area. And when he found out what I had been doing, sending those messages to the Pacific area, he nearly died. He said, you didn't tell me. I said, I couldn't tell you. Well, you could have told me I'm your husband. But anyway,
no.
No.
Now, when you enlisted, what prompted you to enlist?
Well, my girlfriend said I was crazy, but I know I wasn't. I just felt my brother, who was 16, had gone to the Navy. My dad had signed for him. High school boys were gone. Everybody went. And I just thought, I can't stay here and, just be stuck here. So, and I've always been, my mother encouraged me to take advantage of everything I could when I was coming up, because I never would know when I would need it. And she went with me when I enlisted, and she was really an encourager for that. And once I got into it, I thought, this is what I was made to do. Really, I loved it. And of course, we were sent to Smith College because there weren't any facilities for us and they didn't have time to build them. And my commission hanging here on the wall says, I commissioned him, Ensign. They didn't even have time to make new papers and forms, so I'm a him in the Navy records.
Wow.
But they know I'm not a him, and that's what it is. So we went to Smith College. They commandeered the colleges, and we stayed there a month, and it was so rough. We had to learn so much. We had to be able to identify the airplane, in 1 second and all that stuff. It was rough, and the Indian words were not easy.
Well, and I will ask you some questions about basic training stuff in just a second. Now, you've mentioned a little bit as to the why, but it's one of my questions, so you can go a little more with it. Why were you selected to be a cryptographer or code officer?
Because they felt, I had to take a test, of course, and I passed all the tests with flying colors. I had always loved school. My family are all teachers, even my children. My son who's here with me this morning taught online for 2 or 3 universities at the same time.
Wow.
So we've all been, educators. And I just thought, if I could help in the war, I would be willing to do that.
Yes.
And of course, I asked my husband if he would object. He was already gone. And I had promised him I would not enlist. He didn't want me to. He was afraid I'd go overseas and be killed or something. So I sent him a wire and said, 500 of us coding officers are being sent to Hawaii. And then it wasn't it wasn't a state, that was territory.
Right.
And I said, would you object to Hawaii? And, wire me back if you wouldn't mind. He wired me back, and 2-letter word, N-O. He didn't want me to go. So I thought, well, I promised I won't go out of the country, so I won't. So I didn't go. And that's the only regret I have in the whole thing.
Yes.
I didn't go to Hawaii when I could. When I taught high school Latin, I took my high school Latin students to Italy over Easter vacation for 10 days, 5 times.
Wow. That's amazing.
They were thrilled to death.
No, I think that's wonderful that you did that. Please share with us what a code officer does. That would have been the next question.
Well, in our case, we both encoded the messages coming in to the Navy Department, and we decoded the ones coming in, we encoded the ones going out. We had people stationed in San Diego and, what's the other name of that town? The Marines are, that I have a little problem with forgetting. But anyway, in two places, we had our communication officers knew when our message was for the code talkers, because we had to put New Mexico or something in the Southwest in that didn't have a thing to do with the message, so they would know. And right. Of course, they couldn't decode it, our communication officer. So we had 522 Navajo Code, Code Talkers. And we had 2 on duty at each of those stations round the clock. And they would give, there would be round the clock, I was saying, there'd be 6 on at a shift, And they would, what was I going to say? Oh, they would decode whatever came in there and send it on by radio to their friends and their fellow on ships and on the islands all across the Pacific, all the way over to Australia. Wow. 6 code talkers would stay on the ship, 4 would stay on the ship and 6 would go ashore. And they would go ashore only, they were on every ship that we had.
Wow. So that's neat that they had some on the ship and then some on land. That's really neat.
See, they had to have somebody to decode what came to the ship to tell the captain what that said.
Right. That's awesome. No.
But they never let them go ashore on the first sea. They had come across and taken all the islands. We had to take them back. And they never let our code talkers go ashore on the first wave. They waited till the 3rd wave to go ashore from the ship.
That's interesting. It gave them time and experience, and for them to be able to see, that's very smart. I like that.
They had to be perfect in English. On the reservation, they had an English school, and those boys who went to that school were the only ones that could qualify for code talkers, because one little mistake could just be disastrous.
Yes. What did you feel like being a part of the armed forces?
Well, I'll tell you, at first, we had to fight the men in the military. They didn't think we belonged there. We belonged back in the kitchen.
Right.
And since we were carrying all over, I was a courier that first year too, all over the Washington area, in Virginia, in Maryland, all around. And since I was carrying a pouch with secret and top secret messages. I had to wear a 45 on my hip. Well, they made us go down and have target practice with the shore patrol every week. Well, the first time we showed up, I thought we were the ones going to be shot. They didn't want to see us. They said, go on, go on. Of course, I grew up on a farm, and we shot squirrels and rabbits for food sometimes. It was during the Depression. We used those for meat, so I knew how to shoot.
Right.
and I didn't have too much trouble. Some of those girls had never held a gun in their hand.
Oh, man. No.
And they had such a time. But after a few weeks, they accepted us and agreed that we could shoot.
Right.
And from that time on, it was pretty easy. But at first, they did not want us there. There was no way that we should be in the military.
That is, I mean, I think that happened quite often, and I think that's awesome that
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. Yeah.
You've talked a little bit just now. Did you have to go through basic training?
That we stayed 1 month at Smith College for midshipman training. You know, you have to go through that. Oh, that's the hardest I ever worked in my life. I thought I worked hard on the farm. I thought I worked hard in college, you know, but was nothing compared to that. We had to learn all that and pass that test in 1 month. Then they sent us to Mount Holyoke College, which is right near Smith there. That's, forget, one of our poets grew up there. They sent us there to learn the coding. And I had not typed before. And some of our coding machines had regular keyboards. My goodness, I stayed up till 3 and 4 in the morning practicing. We had to type 60 words with no errors before we could pass.
Right.
Now, that's hard if you've never typed.
My mom was a secretary, and growing up, I remember when I was younger, whenever she had to get a job, you know, she had to go through that as a secretary. And it was, I think at first it was like 120, but at some point it worked up to like 200 words a minute. And she did it. She would always pass what it was that they asked, what it was required. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of words per minute.
It's a lot of words, I'll tell you. But anyway, so after we finished another month at Holyoke, we had 2 months indoctrination and, you know, information. And then we were given our commission. And that was a happy day. Oh,
yes. Oh,
that was a big milestone, you know. And then right after we were commissioned, I was sent to Baltimore first. And that there, every ship in the Navy came in there, and what they did was come into port and secure their radios. We took all their messages. Then we, by launch, took them out to the big ship, to the officer of the day. And of course, he was happy to show us all over the ship. So I was on every kind of ship there, which was wonderful. Submarines, everything. Then after almost a year and going and picking up the new codes and teaching them to there were 10 of us in my unit, 4 men, 6 girls. And that was at the end of that, then they sent me to Navy Department, Washington.
Okay.
I'd never been to Washington. Oh, what a wonderful experience.
I bet it is. Be
they
wonderful just seeing all of that for the first time. But in the situation we're in,
with our senators, you know, you can go to the Senate dining room and eat with your senator if you have a reservation. And of course, they have bean soup is their specialty. So we did that. And then to get back out of there, we went by taxi. They have a little secret railway going from the Senate out to the parking lot.
Neat.
We
How
rode
fun is that?
Yeah. Oh,
That's awesome.
I just had so many experiences I can't tell you.
That's so fun. I bet you that was fun every time you got to do that.
Yeah.
What was a typical day like in your basic training when you were in basic training?
Oh my goodness. We had classes straight through from 7 till 12. And we walked 2 miles to meals. And that was in February, freezing in Massachusetts, and
yes,
snow way up to here. And of course, I was used to it, but a lot of the girls couldn't hack it. So about half of them went home. They just quit. They wouldn't go through with it. And I thought, how crazy that is.
Wow.
So then after a year there at Holyoke, then I was sent to Washington, and that's where I stayed. They told us, they said, don't even talk about what you're doing to each other, because we lived in an apartment. They said, you know, the walls have ears.
True. They had to make sure that you guys did not say anything.
Oh boy, I think we would have been put into prison.
I think so.
And if I had talked about it when they released me to inactive duty before I got my final discharge, I think they would have put me in prison, because I had to sign that I would not tell anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so too.
Thought they might have to use that again, but then they decided no. I guess they thought there weren't going to be any more wars.
Right. Now
make up a new code. But the Japanese admitted on the signing of the treaty, you know, at the end of the war, they had never broken one message of ours. Never.
Really? You guys were amazing.
Oh, it was just I can't tell you what an experience that was for me at 21. You know, I couldn't believe that I was doing what I was doing, but I never thought it would end up like this. And I never thought I'd live so long.
Right. I think your generation had, I know it was such a difficult thing, but you guys absolutely got to step into seeing what your purpose was without knowing that, you know, you guys were put into that situation.
That's true.
And I think it's amazing.
And when we came back home, we just went back to our old jobs and went on. You know, PTSD, my husband had that. But anyway, they didn't even know what that was. They just, they said they were shell-shocked.
Yes, I remember that phrase.
Yeah.
Now, because you had to learn how to use a gun, I kept this question in here. Did you qualify for any weapons during your basic training?
Well, the only one they wanted us to qualify for was the 45, because we wore that all the time I was in there. And the orders were, everybody knew we carried a pouch, you know, what that pouch was. They had to know.
Right.
So the orders was shoot first and ask questions second.
Yes.
Thank goodness I never had to do. Nobody tried to take my pouch, but I would go on that old packet boat down the canal down to Virginia with that pouch, and I would sleep with it under my pillow. Yeah. Because they always sent us at night, you know.
That's amazing. But did you have a theater of operation that you served in?
We served all the Navy ships in the Pacific.
Okay. So I guess that would be PTO. That's a Pacific Theater of Operation.
That's right. And first it was the Atlantic Theater of Operation. That first year when I was in Baltimore, you know, it was the Germans and Italians. We weren't in the war then, except for that. And during the time I told you my brother went in at 16, he was put on an oil tanker in the Mediterranean, and they were bombed by the Germans, and he was in that water with life jacket for 2 days.
Oh my
before,
gosh.
before they got them out. And I knew that because in the Navy Department, we had a ship's wheel, and every ship and boat was listed on that wheel and where they were and what they were doing. So I knew what happened to him. I couldn't tell my parents. I couldn't tell anybody.
Wow. Wow.
That was hard too. Yeah.
I bet you that was hard. Oh man. Now, most code talkers were Navajo, but there were not enough Navajo speakers. So the program was set up to train waves to understand the code talkers and code officers, code officers. What was the training like for you? And you've mentioned some. For them interacting with you, the Navajo speakers, the Navajo officers, how were they able to teach you some?
We did not have really what I would consider direct contact with them. You know, I said these code talk. Well, first, let me tell you how they came to be. I think you might be interested. There was a man on their reservation whose parents were missionaries to them. And this boy was born there, but he was an American, you know, a white boy. And he could speak perfect Navajo. And you have to be able to speak perfect Navajo, no trading post language, and perfect English. So those boys grew up as Navajos from the time they were born, and they'd gone to the English school, so they qualified. And he got the Marines to start this program, the Code Talkers. The Marines were hard to convince because Germany had broken some of our codes, and they thought the same thing would happen there. It didn't happen. So they started out, well, what they did was they recruited these Marines who were eligible, and they took them to a room in a building on the reservation, and they locked them in, 30 of them. And they said, figure out a code for us and we'll let you out. That was dirty, I thought.
I think so too.
But they did it. Those 30 men came up with a code, and it was a word substitution code. So you just learned the words that you substituted for it, and they used their common words that they use a lot. Like if we wanted to send a message about an aircraft carrier, we didn't talk about aircraft carrier. We used the Indian word for whale. And we said, the whales are, so many whales are at this position. So many whales are over here. They didn't know what we were talking about. And the Navajos who were in the military, who were not code talkers, couldn't break the code. They didn't know the substitution.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we had to learn the substitution. And, not long ago on Jeopardy, Alex was given this, I don't know, I didn't see the program, but I got it afterwards. They had words and that were used in that code and said, could anybody break them? Well, everybody here came running to me and said, Winnie, do you remember these words? And sure enough, I did remember. It was something else. And I was so just thrilled to see that they were starting to use. I would love to see it in our history books, but I don't know if it ever will be. I don't know if we'll ever teach history again.
Yeah, I know. The Navajo Code Talker language consisted of 211 words, but over the course of the war, the language evolved to 411.
Right.
Can you share with us some of those additional words? What were they? If you can't, that's okay. But like you said, whale, that was one.
I want to tell you about a good book that you would love. And it has the code written the way we think it would be written if they were talking that code. It has all the words we used. And it's called Code Talker by Doris Paul. You would enjoy it. It has a lot of information in it.
I would like to see that. I would like to get it.
Sure, you won't see it. You just want to get out.
That is pretty cool. I love that.
And it has every word. And you would enjoy, you know, they, of course, a lot of their words they got from nature, from animals and plants. Like the word for dive bomber was a chicken hawk. You know what a chicken hawk is?
Yes.
Dive down, get the chicken. See,
Nice.
that they used words like that were so easy for them to remember. And
Nice.
they never made a mistake.
I love it.
They were real heroes. I just can't say enough about them.
No, you know, and I have Indian in my family. Like I have Indian in me as well. So Indians anyways mean, it's important to me. I value that. But I could absolutely see and understand that they would use nature. They're so connected to nature.
Right.
That,
they said they were afraid of two things. One was leaving the reservation, and the other was dead bodies. Two things they feared. Nothing else, he said.
Nothing else.
They said when the war was over, they would have to go back and go through the purifying ceremonies to get rid of that, because they would not do well. If they do what they think is a sin or something against nature, especially, or against God, then they have to get rid of that.
Right.
And they're very strict about that. And after the war, most of them didn't go back to the reservation, most of the Code Talkers. One came to Nashville, and the mayor had a big celebration for him when he died. And he came here and married a girl here and started working here and lived there all his life. And his son said that he had kept that secret inside him for so long that he wouldn't talk about it even when he could. So they didn't know. His family found out a lot of this at that celebration from other people. And I couldn't get there. I couldn't go at that time. I would love to have been there. They had it in the park, at Nashville. But some of them went to Washington, D.C. and worked in the Indian affairs in the Navy Department. They just got jobs wherever they could get them, and they didn't go back.
That's amazing.
They'd see the outside. See, they said that World War II opened up the world for two groups, women and the Indians.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And, even despite that,
changed the whole world for them.
It really did. And it took time anyways, even after that.
Yeah.
It's quite a process,
Oh, yeah.
But it absolutely started something, didn't it?
Yeah. I just feel so glad to have been a small part of that. They say, "Oh, you're a real hero." I said, "No, I'm not." Heroes did the fighting. I just was there to back them up.
No, you're part of the process. And you mentioned this, you have answered this, but just for their sake to be able to look at it and see it again. After your training, where were you assigned to?
After my training, what?
Your basic training, where were you assigned to? You were saying Baltimore.
Yes, I went to Baltimore for almost a year. Mm-hmm. And there I was assigned in that group, the 10 of us. Mm-hmm. Nobody there even knew that we were working with, They didn't know what we were doing. Just a few in the communications division even knew about the Navajo, even knew about the program. I can't believe it was such a hush thing. So, but that's
absolutely. Even
and then,
with
then they sent me to the Navy Department in Washington, and that's where I was for the rest of the time till I got out. Then Congress was so good at passing laws for us. They passed a law saying if you were married to a serviceman or woman, you could get out when they did. So my husband had been over there 5 years in the Pacific, and he was directing planes where to drop the bombs from the ground. He was ready to come home. They didn't have enough ships to bring him.
Oh, no.
He had to wait 2 months for a ship to come back. And he said they had enough ships to bring us over here. Well, I'll tell you what they did with a lot of equipment that they had, not the real big ships, but they just drove it down and drove it in the ocean. They didn't want to bring it back. So they had to start all over.
Tell her about your Secret Service clearance. Secret Service clearance.
Oh, yeah.
And where you went.
While I was in Washington, Gary doesn't want me to forget to tell you about Secret Service. Okay. I had a Secret Service pass because we would get messages for the president during the night sometimes, and we would have to go over to the White House, and a Marine would come with a Jeep and pick me up and take me over there. But to get into the White House, we had to have a Secret Service pass. In the basement of the White House then, now I think Bill Clinton had a brewery down there, or somebody did, but then it was the map room. And on all the walls, they had maps of the battles, all the battles.
Wow.
And there was a lieutenant on duty there 24 hours. Of course, they alternated, and they had never had a woman courier. Wow. I was the first one that he saw.
Really?
When I got there, I went down to the basement and I knocked on the door, got my pouch out to give him the message, and he didn't open the door. And I thought, somebody's in there. I could hear him moving around. Well, pretty soon he yanked that door open, just full force. He was in his boxer shorts. Now, today that wouldn't mean a thing, but then that was the 40s. Oh, my goodness. So he slammed that door shut in my face. And I thought, what do? Do I wait here? Is he going to open it back up? When he opened that door back up, his face was as red as fire. And I gave him the message. He didn't say a word. I didn't say a word. I didn't even salute him. I was ensign. He was a lieutenant. I didn't even salute him. And I just turned around and went out of there. When I went out to the Jeep, I was sort of chuckling to myself. He was so embarrassed, but he was completely covered. But every time I took a message over after that, he was fully dressed. But he'd been lying on the couch, sleeping, because he wouldn't get any messages, he thought.
You didn't expect it, yeah. That's funny. Your first meeting with him.
I had to write my story because all these things happened to me that I wasn't expecting.
Have you done that? Have you written your story?
And when I'm writing it, Gary's helping me.
Nice.
I had it 2/3 done in a hurricane. You know my story about the hurricane.
Yes.
In Panama City, and it took everything I had. So that book went with it.
Mm. Now, what will the title be?
I don't know. Something about a bountiful life or something like that.
Okay. I'll look for it. I'm excited for you. I think it's great that you're doing that. It's very important.
When I left there, I wanted to keep that service pass, as just a souvenir And I said, oh, you can write invalid on it or whatever you want to do, but let me keep the pass. Just to keep.
For
They
memory.
They said, we can't do that. We get caught.
I'm sorry.
So I said, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all you can say.
But see, on my discharge, on the back of my discharge, they gave me a little, this is 75 years old, this card. It says on the back of here, released to inactive duty.
Let me see.
Honorable.
That, well, hope, I mean, that was the hope, right? To have that honorable.
Yes.
Now, you were the focal chosen to learn the encryption codes and would then teach the codes to the others in your unit. How often did you have to learn new codes?
That first year for the Germans, I had to write a lot. We had to write a lot. We had to make up new ones. I never had to have a new one with the Navajo. You know, they had the code, the 211. Then they made up 411 more. They didn't have anything in there for military terms, you know, like types of guns, ships, all that. So they had to write a code for all those things, all the different kinds of ships. Mm-hmm. The submarine was a fish.
I love it. I am going to get that book and I'm going to check it out.
Oh, you would enjoy it. You would enjoy it. You know, I feel that something was guiding me the whole time I was making decisions. Yeah. And I feel that God has been with me all my life. And even coming here, this is the best place. I never saw a place like this. Everybody just is wonderful. And, you know, when you get old and you need a little help sometimes, it's nice to be in a place where
people can help you. And
I didn't want to live with my kids. I've always had my own place. My husband's been dead for almost 20 years. So I've been taking care of myself.
I did see that, the article, and we talked about it a little bit on the phone, how you being able to move here, and I have questions for that later.
Okay.
I'm incorporating that, but I truly believe, just as you, that God has a plan, and he purposely puts the steps in motion. And
everything has worked out so smoothly. Every place I have gone, and my marriage, my career, you know, everything has just been wonderful. Yes. And I couldn't ask for better. And I know that, well, my mother's philosophy of life was faith, family, and friends. Mm-hmm. 3F philosophy.
I like it. It's our philosophy as well.
Yeah.
And one that our pastor has told us about is God first, family and friends second. Anything you go out and do, your work, all the rest comes after that. You know, but it's that order.
Right.
Let's see. On average, how often did you all have to change the codes?
The first year we changed them. They would send me, one time they sent me on a troop train to Miami to learn the new code. It was being made up there. They made them up different places, you know, and we had to go get them. And I had to remember those and not write them down. And if it was during the night and I got on that troop train and was all night coming from Miami back up to Washington, I would forget the code, you know, I thought, but I never did. I just kept saying it over myself.
Yes.
Because I had to come back and teach it to the others.
Navajo is an all verbal language, meaning there was never a written form. This must have made the coding messages more difficult to crack. Was this method difficult for you to learn and to be able to remember? That's what you just said.
Yes. When I would see if they would send us a new word in their code, I would relate it to something that I could remember. And I still remember things that way, you know. Everybody calls me Winnie because Winifred's too long.
I like Winnie.
Yeah, I've been that all my life.
Now, how many hours did you usually work each day? All of
We
you?
worked 8-hour shifts. 3 of us, we went 8 to 4, 4 to 12, 12 to 8.
Mhm.
And there was somebody on duty all the time. Different weeks we worked different shifts. And the weeks that we were off, if we had the whole weekend before and the weekend and the day after, if that happened, we went to New York City and we stayed there. We could stay there 4 days, 4 nights. And we did that often. And of course, airplanes, military transportation was going all the time. Trains, buses, and airplanes from Washington to New York. They didn't charge us anything to go, you know.
That's awesome. Now, your job was very demanding and you had to be very focused. You all were seeing plans ahead of time and deciphering codes. Did this sometimes make you anxious or did you find it challenging?
No, you get used to it. And we didn't have time to think about too much of it. I'm surprised I remember so much because we had to get those messages right out, you know, right away and couldn't wait around.
I guess so. And oh, I was going to add to that. The usual work day was 8 hours a day, but I saw in the article that you sometimes had sometimes it was 24 hours or 12 to 24 hours because of the work you had to do, the learning part of it.
Yeah.
So,
we had 8 hours. And when we got finished with our 8 hours, we left for the next girl or next person coming on. And we switched over like you would, you know, working.
with work.
And we told them, you know, updated them on what was happening and what to watch for and what we've been warned about. You know, sometimes the guys way up, commanders would come and warn us about certain things they thought was going to happen.
Right.
Sometimes they didn't, sometimes they did.
Weren't there nights that you didn't sleep because you were afraid you would forget the code?
Oh, yeah, when I had to go get the code. Yeah. But I was so tired by the end of my 8 hours that, you know, we got something to eat. And of course, my roommate she was not on the same schedule I was, but she might not have to go in for 8 more hours after I got off because they were, you know, they alternated us. So we would go get something to eat. And then we usually just talked and told about our friends. You know, we had phone calls and everything. Went to bed and went straight to sleep. I was so tired.
I bet.
I had no trouble turning it off.
Nope. That's awesome, though. I think that's great that you were able to get the sleep you needed.
Yeah.
During the Battle of Iwo Jima, more than 800 messages were transmitted, and you were involved in sending over 400 of these messages without any error.
They said the leaders of that battle said if it hadn't been for the Code Talkers, they would have been there long after that. They were there months anyway, weeks, many weeks. But that is a little 8-mile island. The Japanese had gone under the island. They had rooms down there. They had electricity down there. They had food stocks down there. They had ammunition down there. So when our men, and I call them men, but the average age for our Marines on Iwo Jima was 19.
Wow.
Can't imagine.
Young men.
And when our men a ship would, you know, they would deboard and go ashore, then those Japanese, they said, would just come up out there like bees out of a hive, you know, and just thousands of them they had down there. See, that they did that because we were going to go to Tokyo. That was the purpose of Iwo Jima.
Okay.
And they were going to see that we didn't get any farther.
But that didn't happen. Now, how did it feel to be able to be a part of serving in the war in this unique way that you were serving?
Well, I didn't have much time to think about it. I didn't ever think that I'd be living at 90 telling, the stories. I never thought that. But I just felt so fortunate to have been chosen to help. And that's the way everybody felt. We survived. Otherwise, we would have been speaking Chinese in California. They ruined so much of our Navy that we had to start from scratch.
Yeah. I know. I thought about that as a young person, first reading about that Pearl Harbor.
And, we were criticized by a lot of people for dropping those bombs on those two towns. We wouldn't have won that battle. We had to.
Yes.
They had to something to stop them, because those Japanese, I'm telling you, they're
right. No. Now, are you able to share any other battles like Iwo Jima that you were able to help with?
Don't know for sure. I have another book of all the battles in the Pacific. And that's how I learned where my husband was all that time. He wouldn't tell me either where he was, what islands. They didn't want them to know. And when he would send me a letter, it would come and this sentence would be cut out. This would be cut out. I couldn't even tell what he was talking about. I could hold it up and see through all those cut out sentences. So he didn't tell me either. And after the war, then I got that book. It's Bill O'Hennessy's book, Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly.
Hennessy was on with him.
How long did you serve as a code officer?
Well, I went in 1944, February of 44. And in 45, I wrote these down so I don't forget. In 45, they gave me a discharge, but it was not complete. They said, you're not discharged.
49.
So in 49, I retired again from inactive duty. So, I was a coding officer for I worked at that for 5 years, even when I was on inactive duty. I still was working for the Navy Department. So I was there for, all that time.
I had said that I read that you stayed on and you served even afterwards.
Yeah, I did.
After you kind of mentioned a little bit of this earlier. After your days as a code officer, part of that, you were assigned to Washington, D.C. as a top secret courier. When did you do this? And what year was that?
I did that. I was that secret carrier. You mean of the messages?
Yes.
In the pouch?
Yes.
As soon as I went to Washington, then that's when I got the pouch and the secret messages and started being a courier as well as a coding officer.
What did your job as a courier in Washington, D.C., what was required of you?
To take to transport from the Navy Department itself to outlying areas that they were wanting to send top secret messages. And they didn't want to do it on the phone. They didn't want to do it on the radio. They gave me the actual papers to put in the pouch. And nobody ever told me that everybody knew what that pouch was. we were the only ones carrying that, those who were couriers. So people had to know. And I always wondered, what if they decide they want those and they're going to shoot me before I can shoot them?
Right.
It was dangerous. It was dangerous. So I don't know.
Did that make you nervous?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anytime I had anything written down, I was nervous because, I couldn't let them take it.
This goes into the next question. Was there ever a time where you thought you might have to use your gun?
Not really.
Good.
Well, now when we went down on that old packet boat down that, whatever that waterway is, it's going down from Washington to the Navy Yard. But that old packet boat, it creaked and it, went like this. You'd afraid you're going to fall out, roll right out of your bed. And I never knew who was on that boat. We never got to see anybody that was on that boat. They put us on there in a room of the boat in a cabin that was, nobody ever came in there or knocked on the door. They were told they were to deliver us to the Navy Yard the next morning. But it took all night to go down that. It was some canal there. I forget what. Anyway, but I always wondered who was on that boat besides me.
Right.
So that's the only time I ever really felt maybe a little, because everybody's so nice. They're nice before they're not nice.
Yes.
But anyway, they were.
No, that's nice. I'm glad that you didn't have a precarious situation. I'm glad that you were okay. Did you ever encounter segregation? Did you see it around you?
Oh, in the Navy?
Yes.
Yeah. But it didn't last long because the leaders and the commanders, they were against that totally.
Good.
And Franklin Roosevelt was an encourager, and he encouraged everybody to get along with everybody else. He said, we can't fight among ourselves. And so I never saw a protester, never saw segregation. We had in our unit, we had a black girl, yeah.
And she was treated just the way you guys were treated.
Just the way I was. Everybody was treated the same.
Nice.
I saw nothing.
Nice. And I liked Franklin Roosevelt as well. I liked learning about him. Everything I read about him is just phenomenal.
I'll tell you, when he died, we had to march from the Capitol building behind his cortege, took down there with the saddle with the boots turned backwards, and everything. I'll bet, I know it's at least 3 or 4 miles. I thought I wasn't going to make it. We had to march when they brought his body from the Capitol building down to the White House.
Wow. So you were there at that point in time. You got to see
saw the whole thing.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Wow.
And when Eisenhower came in, I was standing on the sidewalk when he walked right down the street.
Wow.
Because he came back from the Africa,
Yeah.
And yeah.
Wow. For you to be able
right in the thicket.
Yes. And to see all of that.
I feel like I lived history.
Yes, you absolutely
I do. I feel that way.
You need to make sure you include that in your book. I'm sure
there is so much that I could say that I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to say everything I'd like to. Well, see, I taught for at least 10 years. I taught senior English composition, and I made them I made them, the last 6 weeks of their senior year, they were all going to college. I taught college prep kids. I made them go over all the rules of grammar, and we talked about different structures of sentences, and all that stuff. And they said, we learned that in the first grade. I said, no, you won't remember it though when you get to college.
Right.
I tell you, the first time that group of kids came home on vacation from school, they came to school as a group and knocked on my door and said, Mrs. Breegle, we have to apologize to you. You were right. I didn't know we'd have to write that much.
Right? No,
So
even my
they
children.
They said, just forget what we said to you then. I said, I didn't think anything about it.
Right.
I knew you didn't know what you were talking about.
Right. Even our children, when we homeschooled, I'd have them do book reports like what we used to do and then write about it,
Yes.
a few times during the year along with their other writing samples.
Yes.
And all three of them, I can tell you, they all, even my son, I've got 2 girls and a boy, and they all can write very well. I'm not saying that prideful. I'm saying that they can, it's not just little stuff put together in little sentences.
Yes.
They actually can all write.
Right.
And they're, when they have to do reports and everything, they did fine, but that's what you want them to be able to do.
Oh, yes. Yes.
No.
But I knew when they were doing it, they didn't know what they were talking about.
No, they don't. Not when they're in it. Now, let's see. Would you write home often? Well, you couldn't really say much, but did you still write home to your family?
Not much. I used my iPad.
Did you
I
ever?
served on the board of the Reader's Digest. They have an educational issue for the students in high schools. And
Really?
I always got there, I used that in my writing classes too. And they asked me to serve on the board. And for almost 20 years, I served on that board. They would send me articles, to read for them and see if I thought they were appropriate for high school. And finally, I just got so tired of that I just said, please get somebody else.
At any point during the war, did you ever worry that the Allies might not win?
No, I didn't. I guess I've always been for our team. and I just think that then it was an altogether different time. Today, I'm not sure we'd win the war. But then, it was, people were survivors. We thought of ourselves as survivors and that we helped to survive,
Right. Right. And you just,
I think attitude means a lot.
It really, really does. And I honestly even feel at this time, there's purpose in this, and we are absolutely needing to learn from where we're at now. And unfortunately, I have no doubt that something big like what you went through, I have a feeling that, again, something big will be what we have to go through so that unity can come back.
Come back.
Yes.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Did you ever listen to Access Sally or Tokyo Rose?
Did I what?
Did you ever listen to
Access Sally? No, I never did. I heard some of their things, but I would love to have been on the radio and talk to them.
That would be neat. I wonder if there's a way to look up some of their radio broadcasts.
Oh, yeah.
That would be neat. Where were you when the war ended in Japan? What were your thoughts?
Well, when the war ended in Japan, I was still in the Navy, when it ended in Europe, where was I when it ended in Europe? I can't remember. Once I got to the Pacific, I forgot about the Atlantic. I didn't like although I married a German, you know, he didn't come from Germany, but his ancestors did.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like the Japanese either, though. So they were terrible for women. They had concentration camps for women in the Pacific.
Oh man. Wow.
Terrible.
That's terrible.
They
And
were
you-
awful. Now they're our allies.
I imagine for your period of time in
Yeah.
history, it's hard for you guys to.
Well, see, they were so cruel to our men. When my husband came back, I said he was shell shocked, and he would wake. Well, he wasn't awake. He'd be dreaming in the middle of the night, and I'd get his fist would go and hit me in his stomach, and he'd say, "You dirty Jap." He was still fighting that war, and that was terrible. And they didn't do anything for people like that. You just got over it.
You just had to go through it.
We
That's
went
hard.
down in the country and stayed a month with my grandparents, and he worked with my granddad on his farm, and that's how he got over it.
That's good. Well, hard work and keep getting your mind on something else helps you to get through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What were your thoughts on the use of the atomic bomb?
Well, I think it was a terrible thing to have to do, but it was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, that war would have, we would have gone to Japan. I don't know whether we would have been able to take Tokyo.
Right.
They were so well fortified every place.
Mm.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
How and when did you return home? And what was the first thing you ended up doing when you got home?
Well, I was still living in Washington when I got out to go home, and since he couldn't get home for 2 months, I got a job in a big department store in Washington. Never sold anything in my life, selling lingerie, and all those servicemen, and some of them knew me, from before in the Navy department, come in and say, "You have to model that. That's for my girlfriend." I said, "That's not my job description. I'm just selling it."
That's right.
I did that till my husband, he came to Washington. When he got back, he got in California and then flew across to Washington. And then we went home together back to Ohio. And then we didn't have a house there. We didn't have 2 boys. We went to my mother and dad's house and we stayed there. Then we went to my grandparents and stayed there for a month, then came back and built a house. And then he worked for somebody else for a while, and then he went into his own business. He was a builder, contractor, and he did that till he died.
How did your family feel when you came back, and like any friends or people in the community?
They were fine with it.
Yeah.
My mother, she was always my, go do it. And they were good with it. Of course, my sister she was in high school when I left to go to the Navy. She's 7 years younger. She's still living. She'll be 92 in July.
How well were you able to adjust to civilian life?
Oh, I went back where I was teaching, and I had seniors again, and the boys were 20 years old, and I thought, no way. They stayed out. Then the farmers kept their sons out in the fall, first semester, let them go second semester. Well, they were all behind. And when I got out of college and went to that school to teach, they were the same age I was. I was 20. And because I went straight through, and I started school when I was 5, graduated from high school when I was 16.
That's
so
amazing.
I was behind in age-wise.
Yes.
Everybody.
I did see that, and I thought that was amazing. You were a smart cookie even when you were young.
My mother was a good teacher. See, and you know why she had to quit teaching? They didn't hire married teachers in. If you got married when you were teaching, No,
Why?
in Ohio, I don't know. And it was still the same when I was going in.
Really?
Yeah, we didn't tell my principal I was married till we got married in March, and I didn't tell him till the fall when I had to tell him to get my class rolls, because I would have had to quit. Now, I don't know if it was that way in any other state, but in Ohio, that's what it was.
Wow.
So
And-
she taught me then everything she would have taught a first grader. And at 5, the teacher said, don't send her here. She'll cause me trouble. She talks all the time anyway. She says she knows all that material. See,
she already knows it.
I went to a country school. We went up and recited, with each grade. She had me come up and recite with the first grade. And then I knew what they did. So I went up and recited with the second grade. She said, I can't hold her back. And so at 8, I was in the 3rd grade.
Yeah.
And all my school, I was out of my age group every time.